In Japan, there exists a derogatory term for those who exhibit delusionary behavior, this being chunibio, which combines together chungaku ninen, or second year of middle school, and bio, which means syndrome, and pertains mostly to middle schoolers who act like adults or people who pretend to have imaginary powers. And while this term has been around since 1999, it's gained a lot of popularity in Japanese media and almost shifted its meaning from a derogatory one to an endearing one online after becoming a common trope in anime, manga, and even games, especially in places where superpowers are actually already commonplace. And one of the best examples of a modern chunibio comes from the feathered flight feigning farewell forging fantasizer Fumikage Tokoyami, also known as the jet black hero Tsukuyomi. Hey, so along with the obvious spoiler warning for this video, as it does cover things up into the most recent arc of the manga, I also wanted to give heads up on this video. Due to my dyslexia, I have spent the whole video pronouncing Tokoyami's name as Tokiyami. I think I blended together Tsukiyomi and Tokoyami in my head when reading his name, which sadly resulted in this incorrect pronunciation I've only caught now after I finished editing the whole video. So, sorry I'm too deep into this project right now to correct this mistake, but luckily my writing and analysis of his name was not affected by the mispronunciation. It's simply just I am saying the name wrong. But hopefully this heads up makes this video easier to sit through. Again, I am sorry for this mistake. Fumikage Tokoyami is a pro hero in training and one of the most eccentric members of Class 1A at UA. Along with this, he's one of the best performing members of the class, not only coming in 3rd place at the sports festival, but receiving the 3rd highest amount of internship requests post that festival. He even began training with the 3rd highest rated hero in all of Japan that became the 2nd, that being the wing hero Hawks, even though Hawks claims it's because he was a bird. He's also one of the students that we see go through the most noticeable change skill-wise that isn't part of the main cast, as he is constantly working to control his powerful quirk. But before we get too deep into that, let's first understand the meaning behind his name and design. The name Fumikage Tokoyami is one that not only matches well with the naming themes of Hiroaka, but also the persona that Tokoyami puts up, as his family name, Tokoyami, is comprised of the characters for Eternal Darkness, and his given name, Fumikage, means to walk through shadow. So altogether, the name Fumikage Tokoyami means to walk through shadow and eternal darkness, which is a name that not only matches well with Tokoyami's evil eye, but also his fake delinquent or DQN type chunibio, as he is often caught saying chuuni gibberish under his breath when thinking aloud, but also he presents himself as cool and stoic at times so that people will perceive him as tough or cool. It's a very similar thing to what Jotaro Kujo does. And on top of this, Horikoshi really wanted to push this loner or childishly dark aspect of his character seemingly, as he not only gave him the birthday right before Halloween, but his favorite things are gloomy places and apples, which given the referential tendency of Hiroaka, this is likely a reference to Death Note and Ryu with his affinity towards that specific red fruit. But beyond that, his name being tied to darkness also likely played a role in selecting his hero name, this being Tsukuyomi, which is the name of the Japanese god of the moon, Tsukuyomi no Makoto, who was one of the 3 noble children of Izanagi and originally lived in harmony with his sister Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun, though he was always the more reserved and inactive of the two, until one day he overreacted in disgust towards his sister's guest Ukamochi, who would create food by vomiting it out in a disgusting way, and this caused Tsukuyomi to slaughter them when they witnessed this ability, which not only resulted in Amaterasu becoming furious with Tsukuyomi and leaving him behind creating the day and night cycle, but also the action left Tsukuyomi saddened with themselves, feeling terrible for this rash decision, becoming more and more inactive over time compared to the rest of his family, and essentially turning into Japan's first brooding loner. This comparison to Tsukuyomi's own history matches very well with Tokoyami's own behavior and destructive capabilities with his quirk, Dark Shadow. Dark Shadow is a rather unique emitter-style quirk that takes the form of a shadowy monster-like figure that lives within the user's body and can materialize or dematerialize at the will of the user or its own. Assumedly, a shape of a Dark Shadow depends on the physical appearance of the user, thus with Tokoyami's own bird head, Dark Shadow has its own bird-like proportions as well. Now, Dark Shadow is comprised of what is called dark energy, which Tokoyami's body produces naturally, along with existing in dark areas generating more dark energy, which means that Dark Shadow operates more effectively in the shade than in the sun. This trade-off being that in the light, Dark Shadow burns through a certain amount of dark energy to do just about anything. The amount depends on the complexity of the action. Think about how SP in the Persona series works, basically. Thus, he always has to manage how much he's willing to use Dark Shadow either offensively or defensively in the light, as using too much in one area will leave him lacking in another. Now, the quirk itself is connected to the user via a shadow umbilical cord that extends out from the person's core, and what makes Dark Shadow unique plays into this a bit, as it is essentially a second consciousness, or a second being itself, as it is not fully controlled by its user, and because of this separation of consciousness, Dark Shadow and Tokoyami do not share physical or mental sensations, meaning that they can both work independent of each other, and incapacitating one doesn't necessarily affect the other. Now, the downside to this quirk is that because Dark Shadow is his own consciousness, this means it can refuse Tokoyami's orders if Tokoyami's mind is clouded with doubt. This can easily turn a normal situation into a dangerous one, especially in an extremely dark environment, as the more Dark Shadow grows in power, the more defiant it becomes, forcing Tokoyami to maintain a steeled will when controlling his own quirk at its strongest. And his training has paid off quite a lot, providing him with a large variety of super moves. Starting first with his altered state, Black Abyss, where he summons forth his Dark Shadow and wraps it around his body, wearing it like a suit of armor or an exoskeleton. During this, it mitigates his physical weakness and allows him to use a whole set of unique attacks in this form. All of these attack names have their own chuuni-like titles, which in turn hold some sort of meaning, no matter how simple they are. Starting first with Piercing Twilight Claws, where Tokoyami utilizes the elastic quality of Dark Shadow to extend the reach of his physical attacks, allowing him to maintain a physical pressure on a target without the need of getting close to his targets and providing them an opening of any sort. Now, he likely gets the name from the time of day called Twilight, which is a time in the day before the sun is fully raised in the sky, leaving an area still shrouded in somewhat darkness. And due to this, and of course the coolness of the word, it's a common filler word in chuuni nonsense, hence why it was used for this attack name. Then from here we have Covert Black Ops Arms, which Tokoyami enlarges his Dark Shadow's arms to a massive size and grabs the target, then proceeds to crush them with the intense pressure of Dark Shadow's body, leaving them in an abyss of darkness. This name is also pretty direct, as a Black Ops operation is done covertly or secretly, or more metaphorically, done under the cover of night. So it's perfect that a move that shrouds someone in darkness would be named after this. And then finally you have Black Abyss Sabbath, which is a super move that Tokoyami uses when he's traveling towards his targets at a high speed. He then, before connecting with them, focuses his Dark Shadow onto his hands to create powerful reinforced claws that cleave through his target's defenses faster than they can react. The name Sabbath was likely chosen in reference to the Day of Rest in Judeo-Christian beliefs, which again is common wordplay among chuuni gibberish in Japanese. Though beyond his Black Abyss techniques, Tokoyami has also developed his own special moves for Dark Shadow that provide him more options for his hero work rather than just giving him new attacks. Starting first with a technique that he picked up from his time working with Hawks, this being Black Fallen Angel, which is an ability that grants Tokoyami basic flight, where he wraps Dark Shadow's arms around his waist and lifting him up, allowing them to glide off the ground. He also wraps his cape around his waist to provide Dark Shadow some shade to increase their strength in the task, while also allowing them to fly in brightly lit conditions. Now, the name Black Fallen Angel is pretty straightforward, as not only does Dark Shadow's claws act as wings for Tokoyami when using this move, but also it plays on the trope in anime and manga where the Dark Angel tends to be placed in the role of the protagonist or good guy section. But probably one of the best examples of Tokoyami's training and mastery over Dark Shadow comes in the form of his strongest super move, this being Ragnarok, which is an attack that allows Tokoyami to utilize Dark Shadow's near uncontrollable nightmare form, sending it in a straight line towards something that he wants to destroy, as it will plummet through and obliterate anything it comes in contact with. It even was strong enough to stand up against and overpower the Quirk of Redestroyo in a one-on-one collision. But instead of losing control like last time, Tokoyami seems to have tamed this beast form and made it part of his arsenal. Now, the name of the super move obviously comes from the apocalyptic event in Norse mythology in which Fenrir will escape and run rampage on the world, devouring it with his massive jaw, which in turn is represented visually by Dark Shadow being projected outwards from Tokoyami, as when he uses this attack, it's tearing up both the ground and ceiling. And again, much like all the other terms used for his special moves, it is another very common term used in chuuni gibberish, given just how cool Ragnarok the word sounds. Now, this this concept of having to overcome and control one's shadow is somewhat fitting of what I believe to be the origins of Tokoyami's dark shadow, this being Carl Jung's concept of the shadow in psychology. A shadow is a manifestation of one's dark side, or aspects of our personality or ego that we don't normally like to address, and if left unchecked, they can grow larger and larger and more dangerous for our own psyche. It is something that everyone at some point in our lives must confront in some way or another, and merge with or accept in some form to grow as a person. And in the case of Tokoyami, his shadow takes a physical form, this being dark shadow. As one thing about dark shadow is that it has its own consciousness, and is only sedated by Tokoyami's iron will and confidence in himself, which in turn has created a negative feedback loop where dark shadow feeds off of Tokoyami's negativity and attempts to form its own will and ego to take control of the body, in which it achieves when Tokoyami's chuni persona shatters, though due to his training, he has learned to stop trying to repel dark shadow and more so assimilate with it. This is represented best in Tokoyami's Black Abyss technique, where he literally merges with his shadow. And then beyond this, it appears that dark shadow is also partly inspired by the Venom symbiote from the Spider-Man series, as Horikoshi is a huge fan of Spider-Man, as not only does Venom and Dark Shadow have a consciousness that they share with another body, but they also have some sort of love or admiration for that original body, but can still lose control or hurt those around them when that body is flooded with strong emotions. They also have an elastic quality to them that allow them to attack from a distance or maneuver very easily, and then, when worn, the original body's physical capabilities are enhanced. Now, personal growth is a core part of Tokoyami's character, as it was clear from the onset that he was designed to be a chunibio, which by its very nature is immature and desires growth. And this has been shown great in the smaller details of his character, from the fact that he's been acting the same since he was very little, to him being slightly embarrassed to show off his room, or being asked about his evil eye-esque comments. And of course, you also have characters saying that he seems to be collecting things that they collected during their second year of middle school. Horikoshi would also play with Tokoyami's own immaturity directly in the series, as in the Forest Training arc, where his lack of control causes Quirk to rage outwards, making his team drop their defenses in order to deal with him, allowing Bakugo and himself to later be kidnapped by Mr. Compress, and to rub salt in his wounds even further. Tokoyami would then be used as a decoy so that the League could actually escape with Bakugo as planned. The Horikoshi has been very careful with the practicing of Tokoyami's character, as to not discourage the idea of enjoying life the way he does, making it very clear that even though the world of Hiroaka sees Tokoyami for what he is, somewhat of a edgy child, Horikoshi still finds him very cool, and his dedication to his lifestyle is admirable in a way, as Tokoyami is true to himself even though he is aware of how embarrassing his personality might be at times. And it's this personality that will allow him to grow into such a great pro hero, as the more he's accepting and understanding of himself, the stronger he'll become, as the best way to help others is to understand yourself first. Though during the Metahuman Liberation War arc, it is demonstrated that he still is lacking in some skills required to become a pro-hero, such as decision-making skills. As he follows orders immaculately, he has trouble making the decisions himself, especially in do-or-die situations, which in part comes from his own immaturity. Fumikage Tokoyami is a great example of what makes Hero Aka characters so enjoyable, as not only is he just a fun character to place in situations just to see how others play off of him, but his quirk is also interesting, both in practice and metaphorically. He also seems to be designed in the way to show that while one may grow mentally or physically, that does not mean that they need to stop doing the things that they used to enjoy doing, just because those old ideas were perceived as childish. And I feel that going forward, Tokoyami will be a key player in the taking down of the villain Dabi, given the amount of connections they've had to each other up to this point. And with that being understood, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did and want to help support me and my channel for the future, you can do so by pledging some money over at my Patreon at patreon.com/medinotthebadguy, as any amount helps keep this channel running as smoothly as it does. And if you want to embrace your cursed dark energy and unleash your own evil eye, you can do so by buying a copy of Chunibio and Other Delusions at buyshimonetta.com.